A great deal of geopolitics is fixated on land and sea in the context of security. It reveals how geography, demography, economy, natural resources, and technology determines the political interaction between individual nations. Today, the biggest militaries in the world are in an arms race towards a new type of weapon that can pass through most defenses and thereby reshape the present interplay between great powers. My name is Shirvan and welcome to CaspianReport. Early ballistic weapons such as rifles and muskets were terribly inaccurate. The probability of hitting a moving target was so low that national armies had to adjust their tactics. In the 18th century, European armies started to place their infantries in lines of three, which would fire in turn and create a barrage of ballistic projections that would compensate for the inaccuracy of every round. So even though the technology was still inaccurate, the probability of hitting a target improved as more rounds were fired. As a result, the combat readiness of European armies rose substantially. The logic of statistical warfare was sound, but it also meant that nations required far larger armies. In later centuries during World War II, the Germans designed early cruise missiles that were powered by pulse jet engines. The V-1 flying bomb could deliver a payload to a target without a pilot, but like the early muskets, it was inaccurate. As such, to offset for the inaccuracy, military thinkers opted to indiscriminately carpet bomb entire cities with the ultimate goal of hitting military targets. This statistical equation in military doctrines changed as technologies advanced during the Cold War. In the 1970s, the American Tomahawk missile revolutionized armed conflict. The subsonic cruise missile was powered by a ramjet which allowed it to travel faster, but it was also a precision-guided munition. Unlike traditional ballistic projectiles, whose trajectory was determined by physics, hand-eye coordination, and somewhat sheer luck, a smart bomb could adjust its direction in mid-air. As accuracy enhanced, statistical warfare ceased to exist. Fewer men were required to destroy hostile targets. In fact, maintaining a vast army became a liability as it created more exposure. Moreover, with the advent of precision-guided munition, conventional weapons had to be upgraded with features such as exotic plating, stealth tech, and anti-missile systems. But this also inflated military spending. Today we find ourselves in the next revolution in combat due to breakthroughs in hypersonic technology. Militarized hypersonic weapons exist of two distinct components. The first is a cruise missile, which relies on an air-breathing jet engine that enables it to travel at extreme velocities with relative accuracy, ranging between 5 to 10 times the speed of sound, in fact. This is in contrast to intercontinental ballistic missiles, which are externally fueled. The second component in hypersonic weapons entails a glide vehicle, which at launch is propelled by a rocket, but when it enters hypersonic speed, it uses aerodynamic forces to glide with extreme dexterity, meaning it can change direction in flight and it does not follow a predictable arc. That unique maneuverability conceals the glider's flight path until seconds before impact. The unusual flight path and the speed of hypersonic missiles changes nearly every defense policy, because current air defense systems are incapable of detecting and intercepting such fast and unpredictable objects. There is simply no defense for this type of weapon, at least nothing that is operational. Since hypersonic missiles can overcome all existing air defense systems and deliver a payload to a point of discharge within minutes, it is a weapon that is designed to bolster offensive proficiency. It will be of little use in proxy conflicts and insurgencies, but the missiles can profoundly alter the present geopolitical stalemates. In this regard, it is understandable why major powers seek to possess such a sophisticated weapon. At the present, several technical complications in design and production must be overcome before hypersonic missiles become more accessible. But the United States, China, and Russia are the closest to achieve deployable weapons. Having said that, the research and development of hypersonic technology is a closely guarded state secret. So we don't know what either nation actually has. Sources that claim to withhold confidential information are unreliable, and experts that are genuine cannot reveal such data. Yet what we do know are the geopolitical needs of each nation, and based upon that, we can speculate the type of weapon that might improve the respective interests. For instance, China's military doctrine focuses on the control of the maritime traffic in the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean. That's where the country does most of its trade. Yet the PLA Navy has limited combat capabilities when compared to the US Navy. As such, Beijing would be primarily interested in short-range hypersonic missiles that can drive US carrier battle groups and other forces away from its proximity. The Chinese DF-17 missile, which is equipped with a hypersonic glide vehicle and has been successfully tested at speeds above Mach 7, fulfills the long-term interests of Beijing. Washington, on the other hand, would require a different set of missiles. Given the fact that the United States sits in the Western Hemisphere, but most of its armed conflicts are fought in the Eastern Hemisphere, it takes months to mobilize military hardware, personnel, and supplies towards the battle spaces. As such, it would be in the Pentagon's interest to focus on long-range missiles. However, developing long-range weapons that can respond as swiftly as Russian and Chinese arms in the East requires the Pentagon to construct far faster missiles than their counterparts, since it has to cover more distance in the same amount of time. So the Americans would require missiles with about Mach 20 capabilities just to compete with the Mach 10 weapons in the East. And this places Washington at a disadvantage when compared to Moscow and Beijing. Finally, for Russia, the Kremlin's needs would be fixated on short-range as well as long-range missiles, since it must deal with NATO members in Europe and North America. Russian missiles like the U-71, the Brahmos 2, and the 3M-22 Zircon are specifically designed to handle such operations. In any case, as the leading nations accelerate their research to push flight faster, each state will be exposed to an assault by the other. Technically, intercontinental ballistic missiles function as a deterrent between Washington, Moscow, and Beijing. However, such systems will be of little use against hypersonic missiles equipped with nuclear warheads. This means that hypersonic technology undermines conventional deterrence. Eventually, in the long run, countermeasures will be developed. Directed energy weapons that emit highly focused laser, microwaves, and particle beams may pose an effective defense against hypersonic missiles, but the research on such technology is still in its infancy. In the midterm, the best defense, as history shows, is a good offense. Imagine if a foreign state launched a hypersonic missiles from the Arctic Circle towards the continental United States, and the Pentagon only had 5 minutes to react. That is not nearly enough time to consult the chain of command and formulate a response. The situation is even more dire for American warships and aircraft carriers, which would have even less time to react when deployed in the Eastern Hemisphere. The impact of hypersonic missiles is so profound that it could affect the rules of engagement. For instance, to compensate for the deficiency of time, the Americans, Chinese, and Russians may end up adopting a first strike doctrine, or simply attack on detection, and as the rules of engagement are adjusted to atone for the lack of time, military doctrines are likely to become more trigger sensitive. And what's more is that the leading powers will have renewed incentives to launch preemptive strikes against one another to eliminate the hypersonic missile stockpiles before they are operational. All of this increases the odds of an accidental conflict. Although hypersonic missiles are still in development, The technology is expected to mature by 2020, with possible large-scale deployment between 2025 and 2030. Once they are planted in the arsenals of the United States, Russia, and China, the new weapons will provide a tool to overcome existing stalemates, which is likely to contribute to an arms race in the nearby future. The only silver lining in this barrage of bleak scenarios is that as the nature of armed conflict has shifted from statistical warfare to precision-guided combat, the damage to the civilian population has decreased, even though the sheer destructive power has increased. So the introduction of hypersonic weapons will make conflicts faster and deadlier, but it will also claim less civilian lives. Nevertheless, to avert a new arms race or an accidental conflict, Washington, Moscow, and Beijing will have to find ways to form a non-proliferation agreement on hypersonic missiles. This was a Caspian report by me, Shirvan. Special thanks to our contributors on Patreon who give us the resources to continue our work and remain independent of sponsors. If you would like to join our network or if you're looking for more information, visit patreon.com/CaspianReport. In any case, thank you for your time and Sağ ol.